Joseph Valachi, a turncoat mafioso, provided federal investigators with detailed information on his criminal activities and former colleagues. His information was shared with Congress, the press and the public. Many of his recollections were discussed in the Valachi Papers, 1968, by Peter Moss and presented in a 1972 motion picture with the same name. Valachi was born September 22, 1903, some sources report 1904, to Neapolitan American parents in the East Harlem section of New York City. During childhood, he was drawn into street gangs. He became an accomplished burglar and getaway car driver. Organized crime rivalries eventually pulled him into the mafia. Through his underworld career, Valachi was at various times member of the Reina, Lucchese, Maranzano, Bonanno and Luciano, Genovese crime families of New York. He was an active participant in the Castellamarese War of 1930–1931. He became involved in narcotics trafficking in the late 1950s and was convicted and sentenced to long prison terms in 1960 and 1961. Crime boss Vito Genovese received a similar sentence for narcotics and became convinced that Valachi had betrayed him. Valachi learned of his boss's suspicion and feared for his life. In the summer of 1962, Valachi beat to death another inmate who he mistakenly believed was attacking him. That resulted in a Valachi life sentence for second-degree murder. Valachi subsequently began cooperating with agents of the FBI. Valachi in the autumn of 1963, he testified before the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities in the Labor or Management Field, McClellan Committee. He then wrote this autobiographical manuscript, The Real Thing, while in federal custody in 1964. It was reportedly used as source material by Moss in the writing of the Valachi Papers. The original manuscript has been preserved at the JFK Presidential Library and Museum. Valachi spent the rest of his days in federal custody under heavy guard. He was held for a time in the death house of a prison in Washington, D.C. He was transferred on March 22, 1966, to federal prison at Milan, Michigan, and on September 14, 1968, to a combined pair of cells, later known as the Valachi Suite, at the medium-security federal prison at Latuna, Texas. He died of an apparent heart attack, April 3, 1971, at the age of 67. Following his death, federal officials went in search of a family member to claim the remains and provide for burial. His wife Mildred and his son Donald refused. An April 6 announcement indicated that the remains had been claimed and moved to a burial location but did not identify the claimant or the location. A month later, news reports stated that Valachi's burial spot was in the St. Matthew section of Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Lewiston, New York, near Niagara Falls. Arrangements were made not by a family member but by a local woman, identified as Marie Jackson, who corresponded with Valachi while he was in prison. The reports were later confirmed by the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. Then when I got into the outside world I was very naive. Those kids in the protectory were very evil-minded. Believe me, when we took a shower, God forbid if some of our body was exposed. You wouldn't hear the end of it. We used to put tights on before we went under the shower. I don't mean that the brothers were evil, it was the boys. The only movies we ever saw were still pictures, and believe me, we thought they were great. If we did anything wrong we would be put on penance, and that all there was penance and penance all the time. It wasn't hard to get into trouble, it was the easiest thing to do. Most of the time you yourself didn't know why you were put on penance. Now as far as the brothers were concerned, some were good and some were real bad. Take Brother Albel, well, he was in charge of the tailor shop, and he would give you a certain amount of buttonholes to make, and I would do all my best so that he won't have anything to say, but no matter what I did it was no good. He would say, show me the buttonholes you made. Well, when he saw them he would hit you on top of your head with the tape stick, and believe me, it hurt awful. So what happened? Brother Albel dies, so they put his body in display in the chapel. All the kids from the 5 yards had to view it. When it was my turn I almost fainted when I saw all the spit on Brother Albel's chest. So I spit at him too. What happened after the funeral? We all went on penance the whole 5 yards for about 2 weeks. Here is some of the penance. When we went in the yard we will stand in line with our hands on our heads, and when we went to the dormitory we had to stand in front of our beds the same way until 10 o'clock at night. That would be about 2 hours, and then when we went to the movies we had to do the same thing. They didn't take any of our food away. Well, the kids felt that no matter what the price was to spit at Brother Albel it was worth it. So you can imagine how bad he must have been. He was close to 80 when he died. But I must say one thing, no matter how bad it was I did become very religious. I will explain what I mean later on. Now we had the best band of all. Let's say, St. Joseph's School, St. John's School and so on, well, it amounted to about 100 bands. Once a year they would take about 100 boys in the band down to see the circus at Madison Square Garden, and they would hold a contest of all the bands. This year, to my surprise, I was one of the boys that went. We had on a uniform and they were very pretty. It was wonderful. We went down by subway. I don't remember which one, but it was a subway. We had the time of our lives. No one ran away. I guess I'll finish now talking about the Catholic Protectory. Only say that Catholic Protectory won. God forbid if they didn't win, it would have meant more penance. I don't remember what year it was, but I went and visited up there and the brother brought me all over the place, and that is all. I could say more, but at best I don't. Let me explain the neighborhood of East Harlem as a kid before and after I came home from the New York Catholic Protectory, especially the first time I came home. First I'll explain how we stood on the corner at First Avenue and waited for a wagon or a truck that the rear doors were not locked from top to bottom, for instance a grocery truck or wagon. We would jump on the rear of the truck or wagon and lift anything we can grab. Say like a tub of butter or a small box of cheese or anything. Now the big guys of the block would buy it from us. When I say us, I mean as kids. They would tell us if we did not sell to them we could not steal along the avenue. We didn't care so long as we made some money so we can have a few dollars in our pocket. One of the older fellows would fit in my story later on. His name was Crazy Chuck. He was the most feared guy in the block. Of course I'm talking about 108th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue, the same block as I talked about in the early part of this story, the murder stable. One time some kid and I stole some suits from a secondhand store and we put the suits in the hallway of one of the apartments in 108th Street. As we were coming down the block with another load, we caught one of the older fellows stealing our secondhand suits. Well, this was too much. I picked up a brick and I told him, put those suits down or I'll hit you on the head. He said he took them as he did not know who they belonged to, so I said they belonged to us. See, we got more. So he said that he would buy them from us. I said okay, that's different. Now when we had a few dollars, especially if it was in the summer, we will go to 96th Street and 1st Avenue where there was a boat there that had a swimming pool. We didn't go there too often because that neighborhood was rough. Sometimes they will grab us being we came from a different neighborhood. They will search us and take everything we had in our pockets. This caused a fight as we will get the rest of the boys and we will go back and we would have stones, bats or iron bars and whatever we can get our hands on. Sometimes we caught them and sometimes we didn't. It got to be that way with all the blocks, and we started to fight different blocks, and when we were alone we had to get from one block to another. We will go through the cellars and come out on the next block and then cross the street, and so the same thing. For instance, if I wanted to go from 108th Street to 106th Street, that was what I had to do. We weren't safe anymore no matter where we were, even when we will be in the pool room or in the cafe. We always had someone watching out for us. Now when the First World War was on, we started to have block parties. We used to go around and make a collection and we will get a neighborhood band and we will have real good fun. In those days block parties were common. We will have nothing but clean fun. Sometimes I did go out with some of the girls on 108th Street, but all we would do was go to Central Park if it was in the summer. We will rent a rowboat, or if it was in the winter we will go to a movie. But I did not go with any girls steady. And I can say only that it happened once or twice that I went anywhere with neighborhood girls. Before I stop writing about when I was a boy, I want to say that I learned all the card games there was, as I did waste a lot of time in these cafes. Most of the time that I spent in these cafes will be between the hour of 9 to 12 at night. I forgot a few things as a kid, so I'll go back when I was going to school. Things were so bad at home. We were 6, 3 boys and 3 girls. I never got along with the older one and neither did I get along with the young one. My sisters, I got along only with one. She and the young boy are dead today. I'll talk about them one at a time. First I want to talk about when I used to steal iron. I would get in one of those in rags and things of the like just to eat. Places like where they cut stones or burns coal yard or places like that, and I will take whatever iron or brass I could find and I would go to the junk shop and make 50 cents or $1 so that I might have some money to eat. One time at night I and 2 more fellows were hungry. We saw sausages hanging in the window of a store of the kind which sells meat and groceries, and we had a bakery around the block that used to make bread all night, so we decided to break the window and get some sausage, and we would go down to the bakery and we will cook it. But when I broke the window I stuck my hand in and opened the door. So the other fellow got a bushel and started to put groceries, sausage, nuts, and all kinds of things into the bushel. Then he finds a 5-gallon jug of wine, so he starts to drink. I didn't care for wine, so I didn't drink any. The first thing you know, he got drunk. He lived down by the East River, so we had to cross First Avenue to get to his house. He was married, so we were going up his house to have a feast, so I told him to let me go first, and when I cross First Avenue, I will wave him to come or not. So as I reached the corner, a cop was coming down the avenue, So I crossed, and when I got into the block and the cop couldn't see me, I warned him back, but he was so drunk from the wine that he paid no attention to me. As it was about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I heard every word the cop asked him what was he carrying, and he answered, "Mind your own business," then dropped the bushel and started to run. The cop shot him in the leg and he got arrested for burglary. I didn't come around the block for a couple of days as I was ashamed, as the people in the block were talking about these great boys that go out and rob sausages. So they started to call this guy the sausage thief, but they didn't know who the other 2 guys were that was with this guy. I made believe I didn't know anything. So you see what could happen to cheap crooks, that was the talk. They put $25.00 bail on this fellow, and he was lucky he got a suspended sentence. I got to realize that the cheaper you steal, the quicker you can get into trouble, so that was a lesson that I never forgot. Asked, "Will they hurt your sister?" and he said, "No, they know that I ain't going to tell my sister anything. After all, what does my sister know? It just like you had to bring your sister. Will you tell her that it is going to be used for an apartment that is going to be used to shoot somebody?" So I answered that I won't even question such a thing. Now I said, "We are all in trouble." Sure, he said, "We have spies among them. We will always know their next move." And then I asked him, "Were we mentioned by name? I mean Solly, Nikki and I?" He said, "Yes." "Well, what do we do now?" So he said, "You must give me a number where you will be, because in a day or 2 we got to go out of town." So I asked, "Where are the other guys?" He said, "That's right, I'll take you to them, and then I could pick you up together and we will go, the 4 of us." I asked how far we got to go. He said about 90 miles, and I asked who is going to be there. He said, "When you get there you see." All of a sudden I thought of something. I said, "Hey, I forgot all about the apartment. What am I going to do?" I said, "Wait a minute. Instead of me going over to where them guys are, I'll go to the Pelham Parkway apartment. I can't just leave the furniture there." "No," he said, "I forgot all about it myself." So I told him, "You know what we do, you take me where those return to top 301 guys are, then from there I'll go to the Pelham Parkway apartment. This way I'll get over this before I go with you upstate. Now I want to know, what shall I do?" He said, "You go there and feel your way around and see what it is all about. I'll give you the name of the moving van, and if anything you call him up any hour and you order the furniture to go to a dead storage, and you won't need to do anything. You just take what clothes you need and leave them where those guys are staying." Then I said, "Why don't you call him now so I can arrange things? I intend to put the furniture in storage, so I might just as well do it, and I'll be free to go anywhere." "Okay, pull over I'll call him." And he did, and then he put me on the phone and I left off with the moving van people that I will call them at any hour, and I need not worry about the bill as he has lots of bills. As long as one of the boys call, it will all go on one bill. "Okay, that's fine," I said. Now he takes me to those guys. They were at 246th Street somewhere, I forgot just where. So I met Nikki and Solly and a couple of more boys. They were telling me how worried they were as they knew I will stop in Harlem when I will get back from Dannemora. Sure, I said, "Where else can I go?" So they asked me how long I was on the corner. I told them, and now I was talking about going back to my apartment, and can you imagine if anything would had happened from that apartment, what a fix I would had been. "Now you not kidding," they all agreed. Now Nikki is telling me how discouraged he is, and I told him, "Don't let it bother you, as there will be some fun in all this." So he said, "Yes, some fun. You almost got ruined already and we didn't start." I felt the same, but what was I going to tell him? I hung around with those guys until about 2 in the morning, and then I said, "Here it goes, I'm going home, and I hope that everything will be alright." Nikki said that he wanted to come with me, and I said, "No good, in case of anything it will be harder." So I left and I said so long, and I went. When I got there it was very late in the morning, and I went to sleep at about 1 o'clock the next afternoon. The doorman, I might just as well explain it now, he was not only the doorman but also the renting agent. Well, he rang my bell and he went on to tell me that something very bad happened since you went away, and I want you to know that a lot of tenants have been moving out as we cannot hold you to your lease. I asked him what happened, as you know I just got back. Well, he said 2 men were murdered across the lawn and his wife has already moved out. Now he said the police were here and they took every one of the tenants here fingerprints, and when they got to your apartment I told them that you were a new tenant and that you had gone to your honeymoon, and they said that when you return that you should go over to the police station. I said thank you, and if I should decide to move I will send the moving van. He said okay. If I move, I said, what happened to the $360 that my brother put in your hands when we first moved? He said that I gave him a receipt and all he has to do is come here and he will get his money. I said thank you. As far as I'm concerned, I told him I will stay, but my wife is very nervous and I'm afraid she will want to move. So I told him not to bother calling the police as I will go there right now. So he said okay, you take care of that. I told him that I was going right away so that he won't bother calling them. That very moment I called the moving van and I told him to put everything in storage as fast as he can. I told him to try and make it by 4 o'clock. Because the doorman had told me that 4 o'clock he was going to his mother. Now I go to the house where the boys were, and the next day I found out that the furniture was put into storage, and at least I felt better. Soon we left for upstate. I don't remember just where, but I know that it was about 90 miles from New York City, and when we arrived we went to a large house. We were 4 of us, Solly, Nikki, Chic 99 and myself. Now as we walk in the house, Buster and the doc came right over and shake hands with us, and Buster brought me to meet Salvatore Maranzano, as this was the first time I had met him. He told me to sit right next to him on his right, and I said hello to everybody as it was too much trouble to go all around and shake hands, and as the table was all set to eat. They had ordered for the spaghetti to be thrown into the boiling water, and Mr. Maranzano asked everyone to stand up, and he went on to explain that everyone make himself at home, and after we eat we will all meet one another, as this is a sort of get-together meet. All told, I say we were about 40. It was a very large room, and it looked as though that 2 rooms were broken down and made into one. We all started to eat. It looked as though that everyone was hungry. We had whiskey and wine on the table, but no one seemed to be drinking. After the supper was over, they introduced all of Maranzano's men to Tom Gagliano's men. Now I find out that Tom Gagliano was the man on whose farm we were when we went and practiced with the guns. I spoke about when we were on the farm, in the earlier part of this story. Mr. Maranzano spoke to me on the side, and he was telling me about the Pelham Parkway apartment, that he was very happy the way things turned out, and that he was proud of me being so alerted in spotting Joe the boss and the way I handled the situation when I met them in the elevator. I'll mention the important people that were here at this meeting. Besides Mr. Maranzano, there was Tom Gagliano, Joe Profasi, Joe Passasades, Tom Luchis, Joe Bonanno, Bobby Boyle, The Gap, also known as Dominic Petrilli, Nick Capazzi, Nick Padovana, Salvatore Scilatani, alias Solly Shields, The Doc, Steve Rinelli, Charlie Buffalo, and Buster. I never knew Buster's real name. He died early and young. After the supper we all had coffee, and then they excused themselves and we were led into another room, and after 5 minutes I was the first one to be called. I went in the room and they were all standing by their chair, and I walked to the right of the room. I was directed to sit next to Mr. Maranzano, and on the table there was a gun and a knife. Well, he said some words in Italian which I did not understand, but I know what it meant. It meant that you live by the gun and the knife and you die by the gun and the knife. Then he gave me a piece of paper and he said that he will burn it, and I shall push it back and forth, and I shall say as I do it, this is the way I shall burn if I ever expose this Cosa Nostra. And then he went on to explain 2 important rules, as there are more, but this being time of war he only explained the 2 most important ones, and later on I will tell of all the rules. The 2 important rules he explained at this time were, 1. If you fool around with a member's wife or any part of his family, there is no defense for you, and the same goes for squealing. Now this doesn't mean that you can go and fool around with anyone else's wife. They don't encourage you to do just that. The idea is that an outsider who would like to press charges against you for doing just that sort of thing, he won't know where to make a beef against you unless he has a friend who is a member. In the old days, the way I was made to understand, if a member was married and he had a sweetheart, he was in plenty to trouble, but the bosses developed a habit: if they fell for a member's wife, he would have the husband killed whether she like it or not. There were not many of these doings, but the few that there were that I know of, I will talk about it as I go on. One I already told you about, that was the one who got killed on Pelham Parkway. The last thing that was done before you were made a member was to draw a little blood from your shooting finger with a needle or a pin, which meant now we are brothers, and after it was all over everyone stood by their chairs and held hands. Again something was said in Italian. Again I did not understand. Now as long as I am on the subject of making friends of ours, as this is the way the expression is used when you introduce one friend to another friend. For instance, I meet a friend and I am with another friend, and I know that the guy the first met is a member and the guy that I'm with don't know the guy we just met. I will introduce him in this expression. I will say, hello Jim, meet John, he is a friend of ours. But if he is just a friend and is not a member, I would say, John, meet Jim, he is a friend of mine. The fellow that I am with would understand that the fellow that I introduces him to is not a member, he is just a friend. Now the reason why I brought this out and I am going ahead of my story is that I want to explain to the reader the difference between a member and a non-member. Now in the old days, in normal times, if a member brought a new man in the Cosa Nostra, he would be responsible for any wrongdoings. He will kill him if necessary. Now I want to explain about a new man I brought in the Cosa Nostra in 1957 or 1958, and Vito Genovese was the boss. He was supposed to tell the man that Joe is standing up for you, and if you do anything wrong, Joe is responsible for you. Instead, this is the way Vito brought it out. Someone gave me your name and is responsible for you. The idea of this was to belittle me. Vito thought I didn't understand this move. This is the way they steal friends away from you. It was so raw that Joe Pagano remarked to me, what was the idea of that? I thought that you were responsible for me. As this was the fellow that I personally brought into Cosa Nostra in the last one. Well, I walked away from Joe and said, you heard it. Now I go on with my story. Now we leave the country and come back to New York City, and I was placed in another apartment on Bronx River Parkway. Now, as I have a personal grudge against Joe Rao, as I found out he was the one who put me in trouble in 1924. He was the one who accused me of driving the car for the Irish mob. A telephone call comes in the apartment that Joe Rao and Big Dick are at the Pompeii restaurant. The call came about 4 o'clock in the morning. Solly Shields insisted on coming with me. We got to the Pompeii restaurant at 125 Street and 7th Avenue at about 5:30 in the morning, and when we reached 126th Street on 7th Avenue, I asked Solly to drive the car as this was a personal grudge. He said that he will not take a chance at the wheel. Now, as it was daytime, we could see clear, and when I saw Joe Rao and Doc stretched and a lady enter the Pierce Arrow that Joe Rao owned. Joe was the first to get into the car. The lady was next, and Doc was not in the car yet when I got there, and I pulled say about 2 feet away from the Pierce Arrow right alongside. I waved Doc away and he stopped short, and I told Solly to go ahead and shoot him as he had the shotgun in his hands. As Solly was aiming his gun, and it was not shooting but his feet were tapping a mile a minute. By this time Joe had thrown the girl out of the car and he was on the run. I went for the gun that was on the seat of the car and I fired 4 shots at Joe Rao and I hit him in the buttocks once. Now, as I pull away, I'm asking Solly what happened, as if I didn't know that he froze, but I wanted to hear what he had to say. He said that the safety was on the gun. I said, "What, are you kidding? I opened the safety when we stopped at 126th Street. Didn't I tell you that the gun was ready to fire?" He didn't know what else to say. The next day we got another phone call, and this time Solly, Nikki and I went at 138 and 139th Street and St. Anne Avenue, and there we say the guy that we got the phone call to shoot. Now, before I came to a stop, Nikki and Solly started to shoot from in the car. The first thing you know that the guy ran in a hallway and got away. Now we go back to the apartment and someone came there and wanted to know what is happening, as there were too many misses in 2 days. I talked to him on the side and I told him to tell Buster, and I want to get away from this apartment. I don't want to work with these guys anymore. In a couple of days they sent us, that is Nikki and I, to what we called the haunted house. The reason why we called it the haunted house was because Mr. Maranzano was living there and he moved from there to Yonkers. Now, when a boss lives in a house like we called the haunted house, that house is dangerous, because if one of the guys that had that phone number on his person is caught by the opposite mob, God know how many will come to this house knowing or thinking that the boss is still there, because it was only a couple of days that Mr. Maranzano had moved from LI to Yonkers. Now Nikki and I go into the house. It was a 9-room house. Now the idea of us being there was in case someone called for Mr. Maranzano, we give them a new number to call. Now, as I looked the house over, I told Nikki that the best thing for us to do at night was to stay in one room upstairs and lock ourselves in. This way at night they cannot sneak up on us by going from one room into another. I said it's best we keep a bucket than jeopardize our lives. Then in the daytime we can see what is going on. He agreed, and that is the way we lived there. Now, when we were there about a month, I got an idea. I told Nikki, as he has a girl, how about we take turns in going out and meet our girls, as for sure both of us cannot go together, as one of us must be there to answer the phone. I said to Nikki, you go out one night and I go out the following night. How do you like it? He said fine. I said you go first. He said okay, so I let him go the first night. Now he comes back at 12 o'clock. He said that he could not enjoy himself thinking about me being alone in the big house while he was out enjoying himself. I said, Nikki, this is no good, you make me feel bad. I can't come back at 12 o'clock, I just as well don't go anywhere, you put me in a spot. That is not fair. I got to go all the way into the Bronx, how can I get back here by 12 o'clock? No Nikki, I said, I ain't going anywhere. Nikki said, why don't you make her come to Long Island? And I said, and if she comes to Long Island, how could I get here by 12 o'clock? He said, Joe, about a mile from here there are furnished rooms, and as long as I know where you are and if anything goes wrong I can call you. I said, it's a good idea. I'll call you and I'll give you the phone number of the place where I'm at. I said, fine, do you know the name of the street where these furnished rooms are? He said yes, so I picked up the phone and I called May up in the Bronx and I told her to meet at such and such a street, as I'm sure I don't remember where at this time. I told her that I will pick her up at 7 o'clock sharp. I told her first get a cab, then from a cab get on a train, and then leave the train and get on a cab again, and make sure that she kept her eyes open. So that night I met her at 7 o'clock and we went and had the room we had rented earlier. Now about 3 o'clock in the morning I heard a knock on the door, and as I already asked the landlady in advance that if it will be okay if someone came and call me, I also told her that I would have a code by knocking on the door, so many taps if I wanted to see the party or not. After all, I had to be careful, we were in war for this. I gave the landlady an extra $5 in advance. This is no time to chisel. When I heard the knock, and as I was on the ground floor and right in the back room facing the front door, I did not know the fellow that came and called for me. Now I went to sleep when he left, but I did not sleep all night, especially when I called the haunted house and I did not get an answer. Now I was really worried. We stood up most of the night and May was telling me I don't know what you got into, but she did not like it. I was agreeing with her all night and I really meant it. Now after all the troubles I had all these years I still agree with her, but it's too late now. Now about 7 o'clock in the morning another guy came and called me. This guy the first knew he was the guy that lived in the next house and he knew what it was all about as he was a friend of the guy who owned the house and the guy who owned the house was one of the boys, but he was a greaseball and Italian born. I told the landlady that it was okay to let him in, and when he came in he asked me if I knew that someone was over here 3 o'clock this morning. I said yes, but I told him I did not know the guy, so I did not answer him, and besides I called the house and I did not get an answer, so now I was more worried, so I would not move from this place until someone would have come over the way you did this morning. So he said that's why he came, as they realized that I did not know the guy that came at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now I asked him what happened anyway. He said he didn't know for sure. One thing that he knew was that Nikki ran away from the house. So I asked where is Nikki now. He said Nikki is in the guy's house that lives next door, so I told him that I will dress and I will meet him outside in about half an hour. He said if you want you can take your time as now the damage is done. I'll go away and I'll come back, say in about 2 hours, okay? I said just let them guys in Yonkers know that you found me, okay? Yes, he said I'll tell Nikki that I saw you. Okay, I said I want to steal all the time I can after this, who knows when I'll be able to get out again. So I stayed then, and in about 2 hours Nikki called me and he told me that the people in Yonkers were notified that one of them is coming tonight to pick you up and that the old man wants to see you. So I said that as long as I am in trouble I might as well stay here as long as I can. There was no sense talking about anything on the phone, so I said call me about 3 o'clock this afternoon and I will meet you and we will go back to